Now what's he up to? I asked Mahmoud, relieved that he was gone. He will find Khalid, I think, Mahmoud replied. Damn, it's cold, I spluttered. Yes, I am too cold, like you. I am all day dreaming that this cold will be gone. Mahmoud, you were in Bombay when we went to hear the blind singers, with Qadarbhai, weren't you? Yes, it was the first meeting, for all of us, at the same time together. I saw you there the first time. I'm sorry, I didn't meet you that night, and I didn't notice you there. What I wanted to ask you is how you got together with Qadarbhai in the first place. Mahmoud laughed. It was so rare to see him laugh out loud that I felt myself smiling in response. He'd lost weight on the mission, we'd all lost weight. His face was drawn tight to the high cheekbones and the pointed chin, covered with a thick, dark beard. His eyes, even in the cold moonlight, were the polished bronze of a temple vase. I am standing on the street, in Bombay, and I am doing some passport business with my friend. There is a hand on my shoulder. It is Abdullah. He tells me that Kader Khan wants to see me. I go to Kader, in his car. We drive together, we talk, and after, I am his man. Why did he pick you? What made him pick you, and what made you agree to join him? Mahmoud frowned, and it seemed that he might be considering the question for the first time. I was against Pahlavi Shah, he began. The secret police of the Shah, the Savik, they killed many people, and they put many people in the jail for beating. My father killed in the jail. My mother killed in the jail. For fighting against Shah. I was a small boy that time. When I grow up, I fight Shah. 2 times in the jail. 2 times beating, and electricity on my body, and too much pain. I fight for revolution in Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini makes the revolution in Iran, and he is the new power, when Shah runs away to America. But Savik secret police still the same. Now they work for Khomeini. Again I go in the jail. Again the beating and the electric pain. The same people from the Shah, the exactly same people in the jail, now they work for Khomeini. All my friends die in the jail, and in the war against Iraq. I escape, and come to Bombay. I make business, black market business, with other Iran people. Then, Abdul Kader Khan makes me his man. In my life, I meet only one great man. That is Kader. Now, he is dead. He choked off the words, and rubbed a tear from each eye with the sleeve of his rough jacket. It was a long speech, and we were freezing cold, yet still I would have asked him more. I wanted to know it all, everything that filled the gaps between what Qadarbhai had told me and the secrets Khalid had shared. But at that moment we heard a piercingly piteous scream of terror. It died suddenly, as if the thread of sound had been cut with a pair of shears. We looked at one another, and reached for weapons in the same instinct. This way, Mahmoud shouted, running over the slippery snow and slush with short, careful steps. We reached the origin of the sound at the same time as the other men. Nazir and Suleiman rushed through our group to see what we were staring at. They froze, silent and still, at the sight of Khalid Ansari kneeling over the body of Habib Abdur Rahman. The madman was on his back. He was dead. There was a knife in his throat where the words about luck had been only minutes before. The knife had been pushed into his neck and twisted, just as Habib himself had done to our horses and to Siddiqui. But it wasn't Habib's knife that we stared at, jutting out of the muddy, sinewed throat like a branch from a riverbed. We all knew the knife well. We'd all seen its distinctive, carved, horn handle 100 times. It was Khalid's knife. Nazir and Suleiman put their hands under Khalid's arms, and lifted him gently from the corpse. He accepted the help momentarily, but then he shrugged them off and knelt beside the body. Habib's padu shawl was rucked up around his chest. Khalid pulled something from the front of the dead man's flak jacket. It was metal, 2 pieces of metal, hanging from Habib's neck on leather thongs. Jalalad rushed forward and snatched them. They were the souvenir fragments of the tank that he and Hanif and Juma had destroyed, the pieces that his friends had worn around their necks. Khalid stood and turned and walked slowly away from the killing. I put my hand on his shoulder as he passed me, and walked with him. Behind me there was a howl of rage as Jalalad attacked Habib's corpse with the butt of his Kalashnikov. I looked over my shoulder to see the mad eyes of the lunatic crushed beneath the rise and smashing fall of the weapon. And in one of those perversities of the pitying heart, I found myself feeling sorry for Habib. I'd wanted to kill him myself, more than once, and I knew that I was glad he was dead, but my heart was so sorry for him in that moment that I grieved as if he was a friend. He was a teacher, I heard myself thinking. The most violent and dangerous man I'd ever known had been a kindergarten teacher. I couldn't shake that thought, as if it was the only truth, in that moment, that really mattered. And when the men finally dragged Jalalat away, there was nothing left, nothing but blood and snow and hair and shattered bone where the life and the tortured mind had been. Khalid returned to our cave. He was muttering something in Arabic. His eyes were radiant, filled with a vision that illuminated him, and put an almost frightening resolve in the set of his scarred features. At the cave, he removed the belt around his waist that held his canteen. He let it slip to the ground. He lifted the cartridge belt over his head from his shoulder and let that too fall. Next he rummaged through his pockets, emptying them of their contents one by one until there was nothing on him but the clothes he wore. At his feet were his false passports, his money, his letters, his wallet, his weapons, his jewelry, and even the bruised, wrinkle-eared photos of his long-dead family. "What's he saying?" I asked Mahmoud desperately. I'd spent the last 4 weeks avoiding Khalid's eye and coldly rejecting his friendship. Suddenly, I was unbearably afraid that I was going to lose him, that I'd already lost him. "It is the Koran," Mahmoud replied in a whisper. "He is telling surahs from the Koran." Khalid left the cave and walked to the edge of the compound. I ran to stop him and pushed him back with both hands. He allowed the shove and then came on toward me again. I threw my arms around him and dragged him back a few paces. He didn't resist me. He stared directly ahead at that infuriating vision only he could see while he chanted the hypnotically poetic verses of the Koran. And when I let him go, he continued his walk out of the camp. "Help me," I shouted. "Can't you see? He's going out there." Mahmoud, Nazir, and Suleiman came forward but, instead of helping me to restrain Khalid, they grasped my arms and gently prized them away from him. Khalid immediately began to walk forward. I wrestled myself free, and rushed to stop him again. I shouted at him and slapped at his face to waken him to the danger. He didn't resist and he didn't react. I felt the tears hot on my cold face, stinging in the cracks that split my frozen lips. I felt the sobbing in my chest like a river rappelling and rolling against worn and rounded rocks, on and on and on. I held him tight, with one arm around his neck and the other around his waist, my hands locked together at his back. Nazir, even as thin and weakened as he'd become in those weeks, was too strong for me. His steel hands grabbed at my wrists and peeled them away from Khalid. Mahmoud and Suleiman helped him to hold me back as I struggled and reached out to grab Khalid's jacket. And then we watched him walk from the camp into the winter that one way or another had ruined or killed us all. "Didn't you see it?" Mahmoud asked me when he was gone. "Didn't you see his face?" "Yes, I saw it, I sobbed, staggering back to the cave to fall into the crumpled cell of my misery. I lay there for hours unsleeping, filthy, starving, angry, and broken-hearted. And I might have died there. Some pain, sometimes, leaves you without legs or arms, but the smell of food brought me round. The men had decided that they couldn't wait to cook the last of the rotting meat. They'd boiled it in a pot during those hours, fanning the smoke away continuously and concealing the flame with blankets. The soup was ready long before dawn, and every man took a bowl, glass, or mug of it. The stink of the rotting meat was more than our empty stomachs could bear, at first. We all vomited the foul, retching sips we took. But hunger has a will of its own, a will that's much older than the other will we praise and flatter in the palace of the mind. We were too hungry to refuse the food, and by the third try, or the fifth for some of us, we kept the repulsive, stinking brew down. Then the pain caused by the hot soup in our empty stomachs was as sharp as a belly full of fishhooks. Yet that too passed, and every man forced himself to drink 3 helpings, and to chew the rubbery, rotting chunks of meat. For 2 hours after that we took turns to dash into the rocks as the food worked through intestines and bowels that had seized in our starving bodies, and suddenly erupted. At last, when we recovered, and when all the prayers were said, and when each man was ready, we gathered near the southeastern edge of the compound at the place Habib had recommended for our attack. He'd assured us that the steep slope was our one chance to fight our way to freedom, and since he'd planned to fight in the attack with us, We had no reason to distrust the advice. We were 6 men. The 5 others were Suleiman, Mahmud Melbaf, Nazir, Jalalad, and young Ala-ud-Din. He was a shy man of 20 with a boy's grin beneath an old man's faded green eyes. He caught my eye and nodded encouragingly. I returned the nod with a smile, and his face broke into a wider grin while his head nodded more vigorously. I looked away, ashamed that I'd spent so much time with him, months of hard time, without once trying to engage him in a conversation. We were going to die together, and I knew nothing about him. Nothing. Dawn put fire in the sky. Wind-driven clouds streaming across the far plain were aflame, crimsoned with the first burning kisses of the morning sun. We shook hands, embraced, hugged one another, checked our weapons again and again, and stared down the steep slopes toward forever. The end, when it comes, is always too soon. My skin was tight on my face, drawn back by the muscles of my neck and jaw. Those muscles in turn pulled taut by the shoulders and arms and frostbitten hands, clutching the final agony of the gun. Suleiman gave the order. My stomach dropped and locked, and froze as hard as the cold, unfeeling earth beneath my boots. I stood up and crossed the lip of the ridge. We started down the slope. It was a magnificent day, the best clear day for months. I remembered thinking, weeks before, that Afghanistan, like prison, had no dawns and no sunsets in the stone cages of its mountains. Yet the dawn that morning was more lovely than any I'd ever known. When the steeper slopes eased into a more gradual decline, we picked up the pace, jogging over the last of the rose-pink snow and into the gray-green rough ground beyond. The first explosions we heard were too far away from us to frighten me. Okay, here it comes. This is it. The words chattered through my mind as if someone else spoke them, as if someone, like a coach, was preparing me for the end. Then the explosions were closer, as the enemy mortars found their range. I looked along our line, and saw that the others were running harder than I was. Only Nazir was still beside me. I tried to run faster. My legs seemed wooden and numb. I saw them moving, running, step after step, but I couldn't feel them. It took a gigantic effort of will to send a message to my legs and command them to greater speed. At last I stumbled into a faster run. 2 mortars exploded quite close to me. I kept running, waiting for the pain, and waiting for the killing joke. My heart was churning in my chest, and my breathing came in gasping, grunting little puffs of cold air. I couldn't see the enemy positions. The mortar's range was well over a kilometer, but I knew they had to be closer than that. And then the first shots spattered, the ton of the AK-74s, theirs and ours. I knew they were close. They were close enough to kill us, and close enough for us to kill them. My eyes raced ahead on the rough ground, looking for holes or boulders, trying to find the safest path. A man went down, left of me, along the line. It was Jalalad. He was running beside Nazir, and less than 100 meters from me. A mortar shell exploded directly in front of him and ripped his young body into pieces. Looking down again, I jumped over rocks and boulders, and I stumbled but didn't fall. I saw Suleiman, 50 meters in front of me, clutch at his throat and then fall forward, running a few more paces doubled up as if he was searching for something on the ground in front of him. His body crumpled and collapsed over his face, tumbling to the side. His face and throat were bloodied and broken and torn open. I tried to run around him, but the ground was rough and strewn with rocks, and I had to jump over his body as I ran. I saw the first flashes of fire from the enemy Kalashnikovs. They were far away, at least 200 meters, much further than I'd guessed. A tracer bullet fizzed past me, only one step to my left. We wouldn't make it. We couldn't make it. There weren't many of them, there weren't many guns firing, but they had so much time to get a sight on us and shoot us down. They were going to kill us all. Then a wild flurry of explosions crunched into the enemy lines. The idiots. They blew up their own mortar shells, I thought, and gunfire like fireworks rattled the world from everywhere at once. And Nazir raised his assault rifle and fired as he ran, and I saw Mahmoud Melbaf firing ahead of me, on my right, where Suleiman had been, and I raised my weapon and pulled the trigger. There was a horrible, blood-freezing scream somewhere very close. I suddenly recognized it as my own, but I couldn't stop it. And I looked at the men, the brave and beautiful men beside me, running into the guns, and God help me for thinking it, and God forgive me for saying it, but it was glorious, if glory is a magnificent and raptured exaltation. It was what love would be like, if love was a sin. It was what music would be, if music could kill you. And I climbed a prison wall with every running step. And then, in a world suddenly soundless as the deepest sea, my legs stopped still, and hot, gritty, filthy, exploding earth clogged my eyes and my mouth. Something had hit my legs. Something hard and hot and viciously sharp had hit my legs. I fell forward as if I'd been running in the dark and I'd smashed into a fallen tree trunk. A mortar round, the metal fragments, the shock-deafened silence, the burning skin, the blinding earth, the choking struggle for breath. There was a smell that filled my head. It was the smell of my own death. It smells of blood and seawater and damp earth, and the ash of burned wood when you smell your own death before you die. And then I hit the ground so hard that I plunged through it into a deep, undreaming darkness. And the fall was forever. And there was no light, no light. Part 5. Chapter 37. If you stare into its cold dead eye, the camera always mocks you with the truth. The black and white photograph showed almost all the men of Qatar's Mujahideen unit assembled for the kind of formal portrait that makes the people of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India seem more stiff and gloweringly self-conscious than they really are. It was impossible to tell from that photo how much those men had loved to laugh, and how readily they'd smiled. But none of them were looking directly into the lens of the camera. All the eyes but mine were a little above or below, a little to the left or the right. Only my own eyes stared back at me as I held the picture in my bandaged hands, and remembered the names of the men leaning together in the ragged lines. Masdar Gul, the stonemason, whose name means laborer, and whose hands were permanently gray-white from decades of work with granite. Dowd, who liked to be called by the English version of his name, David, and whose dream it was to visit the great city of New York and eat a meal in a fine restaurant. Zamanat, whose name means trust, and whose brave smile concealed the agony of shame he'd felt that his whole family lived in hungry squalor at Jalozai, a huge refugee camp near Peshawar. Haji Akbar, who'd been appointed as the doctor in the unit for no other reason than that he'd once spent 2 months as a patient in a Kabul hospital, and who'd greeted my acceptance of the doctor's job, when I arrived at the mountain camp, with prayers and a little dervish dance of joy. Aleph, the mischievously satirical Pashtun trader, who died crawling in the snow with his back torn open and his clothes on fire. Juma and Hanif, the 2 wild boys who were killed by the madman Habib. Jalalad, their fearless young friend, who died in the last charge. Ala-ud-Din, whose name in English is shortened to Aladdin, and who escaped unscathed. Suleiman Shabadi, of the furrowed brow and sorrowing eyes, who died leading us into the guns. And in the center of the assembly there was a smaller, tighter group around Abdul Qadir Khan, Ahmedzadeh, the Algerian, who died with one hand clenched in the frozen earth and the other knotted into mine. Khalid Ansari, who murdered the madman Habib and then walked into the lost world of the smothering snow. Mahmoud Melbaf, who survived the last charge like Ala-ud-Din, unwounded and unmarked. Nazir, who ignored his own wounds to drag my unconscious body to safety, and me. Standing behind and a little to the left of Qadirbai, my expression in the photograph was confident, resolute, and self-possessed. And the camera, they say, doesn't lie. It was Nazir who'd saved me. The mortar shell that had exploded so close to us, as we ran into the guns, ripped and ruptured the air. The shock wave burst my left eardrum. In the same deafened moment, pieces of the exploded shell passed us in a hot metal blizzard. None of the larger chunks of metal hit me, but 8 small pieces of the shrapnel smashed into my legs below the knees, 5 in one leg and 3 in the other. 2 smaller pieces hit my body, 1 in the stomach and 1 in the chest. They tore through the heavy layers of my clothing, and even pierced my thick money belt and the solid leather straps of my medic's bag, burning their way into my skin. Another chunk hit my forehead, high above the left eye. They were tiny fragments, the largest of them about the size of Abe Lincoln's face on an American penny coin. Still, they were traveling at such a speed that they took my legs out from under me. Earth, thrown up by the explosion, peppered my face, blinding and choking me. I hit the ground hard, just managing to turn my face aside before the impact. Unfortunately, I turned the burst eardrum to the ground, and the violence of the blow rived the wound even further. I blacked out. Nazir, who was wounded in the legs and the arm, pulled my unconscious body into the shelter of a shallow, trench-like depression. He collapsed himself, then, covering my body with his own until the bombardment stopped. Lying there with his arms around my neck, he took a hit in the back of his right shoulder. It was a piece of metal that would have hit me, and might have killed me, had Cater's man not protected me with his love. When all was quiet, he dragged me to safety. It was Saeed, yes? Mahmoud Melbaf asked. Sorry? It was Saeed who took the picture, was it not? Yes. Yes. It was Saeed. They called him Kishmishi. The word swept us into remembrances of the shy, young Pashtun fighter. He'd seen Qadarbhai as the embodiment of all his warrior heroes, and he'd followed him everywhere, adoringly, with eyes he quickly cast down when the Khan looked his way. He'd survived smallpox as a child, and his face was severely pockmarked with dozens of small, brown, dish-like spots. His nickname, Kishmishi, used with great affection by the older fighters, meant raisins. He'd been too shy to pose with us in the photograph, so he'd volunteered to operate the camera. He was with Cater, I muttered. Yes, at the end. Nazir saw his body, at the side of Cater, very close to him. I think he would ask to be with Abdul Kader even if he knew, before the attack, that they would get an attack, and get killed. I think he would ask to die like that. And he was not the only one. Where did you get this? Khalid had the roll of film. Remember? He had the only camera that Cater gave his permission. The film was with other things he let fall down to the ground from his pockets when he went from us. I take it with me. I put it in the photo studio last week. They returned the photos this morning. I thought you would like it to see them, before we leave. Leave? Where are we going? We have to get out of here. How are you feeling? I'm fine, I lied. I'm okay. I sat up on the cot bed and swung my legs over the side. When my feet hit the floor there was a pain so excruciating in my shins that I moaned aloud. Another fierce pain throbbed at my forehead. I probed with my blunt, bandaged fingers at a wad of dressing beneath a bandage that wound around my head like a turban. A third pain in my left ear nagged for my attention. My hands were aching, and my feet, swaddled in 3 or more layers of socks, felt as if they were burning. There was a painful ache in my left hip, where the horse had kicked me when the jets had torn up the sky above us, months before. The wound had never properly healed, and I suspected that a bone was chipped beneath the tender flesh. My forearm felt numb near the elbow, where my own horse had bitten me in its panic. That wound was also months old, and it too had never really healed. Doubled over, resting on my thighs, I could feel the tightness of my stomach and the leaner flesh of my legs. I was thin, after starving on the mountain. Too thin. All in all, it was a mess. I was in a bad way. Then my mind came back to the bandages on my hands, and a sensation close to panic rose like a spear in my spine. What are you doing? I've got to get these bandages off, I snapped, tearing at them with my teeth. Wait, Mahmoud cried. I will do it for you. He unwound the bulky bandages slowly, and I felt the sweat run from my eyebrows onto my cheeks. When both lots of bindings were removed, I stared at the disfigured claws that my hands had become, and I moved them, flexing the fingers. Frostbite had split my hands open at all the knuckle joints, and the bruised black wounds were hideous, but all the fingers and all the fingertips were there. You can thank Nazir, Mahmoud muttered softly as he examined my cracked and peeling hands. They were thinking to cut off your fingers, but he would not let them. And he would not let them leave you until they treated all your injuries. He did force them to help the frostbite injuries on your face, also. He had the Kalashnikov and your automatic pistol. Here. He asked me to give it to you, when you wake up. He produced the Stechkin, wrapped in a coil of cheesecloth. I tried to take it, but my hands couldn't hold the bundle. I will keep it for you, Mahmoud offered with a stiff little smile. Where is he? I asked, still dazed and drilled by the pain, but feeling better and stronger by the minute. Over there, Mahmoud indicated, nodding his head. I turned to see Nazir, sleeping on his side on a cot similar to my own. He is resting, but he is ready to move. We must leave here soon. Our friends will come for us at any time now, and we must be ready to move. I looked around me. We were in a large, sand-colored tent with pallet floors and about 15 folding cot beds. Several men wearing Afghan clothing, loose pants, tunic shirts, and long, sleeveless vests in the same shades of pale green, moved among the beds. They were fanning the wounded men with straw fans, washing them with buckets of soapy water, or carrying away wastes through a narrow slit in the canvas door. Some of the wounded were moaning or speaking out their pain in languages I couldn't understand. The air in that Pakistani plain, after months in the snowy peaks of Afghanistan, was thick and hot and heavy. There were so many strong smells, one upon another, that my senses rejected them and concentrated on one particularly pungent aroma. The unmistakable smell of perfumed Indian basmati rice, cooking somewhere close to the tent. I'm fucking hungry, man, I gotta tell ya. We will eat good food soon, Mahmoud assured me, allowing himself a laugh. Are we? This is Pakistan? Yes, he laughed again. What can you remember? Not much. Running. They were shooting at us, from a long way off. Mortars everywhere. I remember. I was hit. I felt along the padded bandages that swathed my shins, from knees to ankles. And I hit the ground. Then, I remember, was it a jeep? Or a truck? Did that happen? Yes. They took us. Masood's men. Masood? Ahmed Shah. The lion himself. His men made the attack on the dam and the two main roads, to Kabul and to Quetta. They put a siege on Kandahar. They are still there, outside the city, and they will not leave, I think so, until the war is over. We ran into the middle of it, my friend. They rescued us. It was, how to say, the less they do for us. The least they could do for us? Yes. Because it was them who killed us. What? Yes. When we made our escaping out of the mountain, running down, the Afghan army shoot at us. Masood's men see us, and think we are some of the enemy. They are a long way from us. They start to shoot at us with mortars. Our own people shot at us? Everybody was shooting. I mean, everyone shooting in the same time. Afghan army, they were shooting at us also, but the mortars that did hit us, I think they were our own side. And that made Afghan army and Russian soldiers run away. I killed 2 of them myself when they run away. The men of Ahmed Shah Massoud, they had stingers. The Americans give them the stingers, in April, and since that time, the Russians having no helicopters. Now the Mujahedin fight back in every place. Now the war is over, in 2 years, or maybe 3, inshallah. April, what month is this? Now is May. How long have I been here? 4 days, Lynn, he answered softly. 4 days. I'd thought it was 1 night, 1 long sleep. I looked over my shoulder again at the sleeping form of Nazir. Are you sure he's okay? He is injured, here and here, but he is strong, and he can move himself. He will be well, inshallah. He is like a shotor. He laughed, using the Farsi word for camel. He makes his mind, and nobody can change him. I laughed with him for the first time since I'd woken. The laugh sent my hands to my head in an effort to contain the throbbing pain it caused. I wouldn't like to be the one who tried to change Nazir's mind about anything, once it was made up. Me too not. Mahmoud agreed. The soldiers of Massoud, they carried you and Nazir, with me, to a car, a good Russian car. After the car, we moved you and Nazir to a truck, for the road to Chaman. At Chaman, the Pakistanis, border guards, they want to take Nazir's guns. He give them money, some of your money, from your money belt, and he keep his guns. We hide you in the blankets, with 2 dead men. We put them on top of you, and we show them to border guards, and tell that we want to give good Muslim burial for these men. Then we come into Quetta, to this hospital, and again they want to take Nazir's guns. Again he give them money. They want to cut your fingers because of the smell. I put my hands to my nose and sniffed at them. There was a rotten, death-fetid smell to them still. It was faint, but clear enough to remind me of the rotting goat's feet we'd eaten as our last supper on the mountain. My stomach churned, arching like a fighting cat. Mahmoud quickly reached for a metal dish and thrust it under my face. I vomited, spitting black-green bile into the bowl, and fell forward helplessly onto my knees. When the nausea attack passed, I sat back on the cot and snatched gratefully at the cigarette Mahmoud lit for me. Go on. I stuttered. What? You were saying, about Nazir? Oh yes, yes, he pulled his Kalashnikov out from under his patu and pointed at them. He tell them he will kill them all, if they cut you. They want to call the guards, the camp police, but Nazir, he is in the door of the tent, with his gun. They cannot go past him. And I am on his other side, looking for his back. So they fix you. That's a hell of a health plan. An Afghan with a Kalashnikov pointed at your doctor. Yes, he agreed without irony. And after, they fix Nazir. And then, after 2 days with no sleep, and many wounds, Nazir sleep. They didn't call the guards, when he went to sleep. No, they're all Afghans here. Doctors, wounded men, guards, everybody is Afghan. But not the camp police. They are Pakistani. The Afghans, they don't like the Pakistan police. They have big trouble with Pakistan police. Everybody has trouble with Pakistan police. So they give a permission to me, and I take Nazir's guns when he sleep. And I look after him. And I look after you. Wait, I think our friends are here. The long flaps of the tent's doorway opened all the way back, stunning us with the yellow light of a warm day. 4 men entered. They were Afghans, veteran fighters, hard men, with eyes that stared at me as if they were looking along the decorated barrel of a Jazail rifle. Mahmoud rose to greet them, and whispered a few words. 2 of the men woke Nazir. He'd been in a deep sleep, and spun round at the first touch, grasping at the men and ready to fight. Reassured by their gentle expressions, he then turned his head to check on me. Seeing me awake and sitting up, he grinned so broadly that it was a little alarming in a face so seldom struck with a smile. The 2 men helped him to his feet. There was a wad of bandage strapped to his right thigh. Supporting himself on their shoulders, he limped out into the sunlight. The other men helped me to my feet. I tried to walk, but my wounded shins refused to obey me, and the best I could manage was a tottering shuffle. After a few seconds of that embarrassingly feeble scuffling, the men formed a chair with their arms and swept me up effortlessly between them. For the next 6 weeks, that was the pattern of our recovery. A few days, perhaps as long as a week, in one location before an abrupt shift to a new tent or slum hut or hidden room. The Pakistan Secret Service, the ISI, had a malign interest in every foreigner who entered Afghanistan without their sanction during the war. The problem for Mahmoud Melbath, who was our guardian in those vulnerable weeks, was the fascination our story held for the refugees and exiles who harbored us. I'd darkened my blonde hair, and I wore sunglasses almost all the time. But no matter how careful and secretive we were in the slums and camps where we stayed, there was always someone who knew who I was. The temptation to talk about the American gunrunner who was wounded in battle, fighting with the Mujahideen, was irresistible. Talk like that would have been enough to pique the curiosity of any intelligence agent from any agency. And had the secret police found me, they would have discovered that the American was in fact an escaped convict from Australia. That would have meant promotions for some, and a special thrill for the torturers who would get to work on me before they handed me over to the Australian authorities. So we moved often and we moved quickly, and we spoke to none but the few we trusted with our wounded lives. Little by little, the details emerged. the more complete story of the battle we'd run into, and our rescue after it. The Russian and Afghan soldiers who'd surrounded our mountain comprised the best part of a company and, as such, were probably led by a captain. Their sole purpose in operating among the Shar-I-Safa mountains was to catch and kill Habib Abdur-Rahman. A huge reward had been posted for his arrest, but the terror and the horror that his atrocities had forced into their minds made the hunt for him a much more personal operation for the searchers. So mesmerized were they by his savage hatred, and so obsessed were they with his capture, that they failed to detect the stealthy advance of Ahmed Shah Massoud's forces. When we made our break for freedom, acting on Habib's information that most of the Russians and the Afghans were busy laying mines and other traps on the far side of the mountain, the startled sentries in the deserted enemy camp had opened fire. They'd thought, perhaps, that Habib himself was coming for them, because their fire was wild and undisciplined. That action had precipitated the attack that was being planned by Massoud's Mujahedin, who must have seen the firing as a preemptive strike by the Russians. The explosions I'd seen and heard as I ran toward the enemy, they blew up their own mortar shells, the idiots, were actually direct hits on the Russian positions by Massoud's mortars. The wider mortar strikes that tore into our line were mere accidents, friendly fire, as they say. And that was the elated moment I'd called glorious, in my mind, as I ran into the guns. That stupid waste of lives, that friendly fire. There wasn't any glory in it. There never is. There's only courage and fear and love. And war kills them all, one by one. Glory belongs to God, of course. That's what the word really means. And you can't serve God with a gun. When we fell, Massoud's men pursued the fleeing enemy all the way around the mountain and into the returning company of minelayers. The battle that followed was a massacre. Not one man of the force sent to catch and kill Habib Abdur-Rahman survived. He would have liked that, the madman, had he been alive to hear it. I know exactly how he would have grinned, with his wide mouth gaping soundless and his grief-crazed eyes bulging unswollen hatreds. All that cold day, and into the sudden evening, Nazir and I had remained on the battleground. As we shivered in the swiftly falling shadows of sunset, the Mujahedin and the survivors from our own unit returned from the fighting to find us. Mahmud and Ala-ud-Din brought the dead, Suleiman and Jalalad, from the barren mountain. Massoud's men had combined with independent Achakzai fighters to claim the Chaman Highway from the pass all the way to the Russian defensive perimeter of besieged Kandahar, less than 50 kilometers from the city. The evacuation to Chaman, and through the pass to Pakistan, was rapid and without incident. We rode in a truck, carrying our dead friends with us, and reached the checkpoint in hours, the journey that had taken us a month of mountains on Kader's horses. Nazir healed rapidly and began to regain weight. The wounds in his arm and the back of his shoulder closed over well, and gave him little trouble. But the larger and deeper wound to his right thigh seemed to have damaged the ligamentary relationship between muscle, bone, and tendons, from his hip to his knee. The upper leg was stiff, and he still walked with a limp as he swung his right step around the hip, instead of through it. His spirits were relatively high, however, and he was anxious to return to Bombay, so anxious, in fact, that his fretting attention to my slower recovery became irritating. I snapped at him a couple of times when his solicitous urging, "You better. You come now? We go now," became unendurably annoying. I didn't know then that he had a mission, Kader's last mission, waiting for him in Bombay. The mission was all that held his grief and his shame at surviving Abdul Kader in check. And every day, as our health improved, the obligations of Kader's last command to him grew more suffocating, and his dereliction, as he saw it, more profane. I had preoccupations of my own. The wounds on my legs were healing readily enough, and the skin on my forehead closed safely over a small, lumpy ridge of bone, but my ruptured eardrum became infected, and it was the source of a constant and almost unbearable pain. Every mouthful of food, every sip of water, every word I spoke, and every loud noise that I heard sent piercing little scorpion stings along the nerves of my face and throat, and deep into my fevered brain. Every movement of my body, or turn of the head, stabbed into that sweating excruciation. Every inward breath and sneeze or cough magnified the torment. Shifting accidentally in my sleep and bumping the damaged ear sent me starting up from the cot with a shout that woke every man for 50 meters around. And then, after 3 weeks of that maddening, tortuous pain and massive, self-medicated doses of penicillin and hot antibiotic washes, the wound healed and the pain receded from me just as memories do, like landmarks on a distant, foggy shore. My hands healed around the deadened tissue on the knuckle joints. Truly frozen tissue never really heals, of course, and the injury was one of many that settled in my flesh in those exile years. I took the suffering from Cater's Mountain into my hands, and every cold day sends me back there with my hands aching, just as they did when I clutched at the gun before the battle. Nevertheless, in the warmer air of Pakistan my fingers flexed and moved and obeyed me. My hands were ready for the work I had waiting, the little matter of revenge in Bombay. Although my body was thinner after the ordeal, it was harder and tougher than it had been all those plump months before, when we'd first set out for Cater's war. Nazir and Mahmud organized our return trip by a series of connecting trains. They'd acquired a small arsenal of weapons in Pakistan, and were intent on smuggling them into Bombay. They concealed the guns in bales of fabric, and shipped them in the care of 3 Afghans who were fluent in Hindi. We rode in different carriages, and never acknowledged the men, but the illicit cargo was always on our minds. The irony of it, we'd set off to smuggle guns into Afghanistan, and we were returning to smuggle guns into Bombay, made me laugh when it occurred to me, as I sat in my first-class carriage. But the laughter was bitter, and the expression it left on my face turned the eyes of my fellow passengers away. It took us a little over 2 days to get back to Bombay. I was traveling on my false British book, the one I'd used to enter Pakistan. According to the entries in the book, I'd overstayed on my visa. Using the little smiling charm I could muster and the last of the money Cater had paid me, the last American dollars, I bribed the officials on both the Pakistani and Indian sides of the border without raising so much as the flicker of an eye. And an hour after dawn, 8 months after we left her, we walked into the deep heat and frantic, toiling fervency of my beloved Bombay. From a discreet distance, Nazir and Mahmud Melbaf supervised the unloading and transport of their military cargo. Promising Nazir that I would meet up with him that night at Leopold's, I left them at the station. I took a cab. I felt drunk on the sound and color and gorgeous flowing kinesis of the island city. But I had to concentrate. I was almost out of money. I directed the driver to the black market currency collection center in the fort area. With the taxi waiting below, I ran up the 3 narrow wooden flights to the counting room. A memory of Khalid wrung out my heart. I used to run up these stairs with Khalid, and I clenched my jaw against it, just as I bit down on the pain in my wounded shins. The 2 big men, loitering with intent on the landing outside the room, recognized me. We shook hands, all of us smiling widely. "What's the news of Qadrbhai?" one of the men asked. I looked into his tough young face. His name was Amir. I knew him to be brave and reliable and devoted to the Khan. For the blink of an eye it seemed, incredibly, that he was making a joke about Cater's death, and I felt a quick, angry impulse to stiffen him. Then I realized that he simply didn't know. How is that possible? Why don't they know? Instinct told me not to answer his question. I held my eyes and my mouth in a hard, impassive little smile, and brushed past him to knock at the door. A short, fat, balding man in a white singlet and dhoti opened the door and thrust out his hands at once in a double handshake. It was Rajubai, controller of the currency collections for Abdul Qadir Khan's Mafia Council. He pulled me into the room and closed the door. The counting room was the core of his personal and business universe, and he spent 20 out of every 24 hours there. The thin, faded, pink-white cord across his shoulder, under his singlet, declared that he was a devout Hindu, one of many who worked within Abdul Qadir's largely Muslim empire. "Linbaba, so good to see you," he said with a happy grin. "Qadrbhai Kahan Hain? Where is Qadrbhai?" I struggled to keep the surprise from my face. Rajubai was a senior man. He held a seat at the council meetings. If he didn't know that Qadir was dead, then nobody in the city would know. And if Qadir's death was still a secret, then Mahmud and Nazir must have insisted on the suppression of the news. They hadn't said anything to me about it. I couldn't understand it. Whatever their reasons, I decided to support them and to keep my silence on the matter. Akila Hain, I replied, returning his smile. I'm alone. It wasn't an answer to his question, and his eyes narrowed on the word. Akila, he repeated. Alone? Yes, Rajubai, and I need some money, fast. I've got a taxi waiting. You need dollars, Lin? Dollars Naheen. Surf rupiah. Not dollars. Only rupees. How much you need? Do 10,000, I answered, using the slang phrase 3,000, which always means 3. 10,000, he huffed, more from habit than any real concern. 3,000 rupees was a considerable sum to the street runners or in the slums, but it was a trifling amount in the context of the black market currency trade. Rajubai's office collected 100 times that much and more every day, and he'd often paid me 60,000 rupees at a time as my wage and my share of commissions. Abby. Abby. Now, brother, now. Rajubai turned his head and gestured, with a twitch of his eyebrows, to one of his clerks. The man handed over 3,000 rupees in used but clean 100 rupee notes. Riffling the small bundle first, from habit, as a double check, Rajubai handed the notes across. I peeled off 2 notes to put in my shirt pocket, and pushed the rest inside a deeper pocket in my long vest. Shukriya, Cha-cha, I smiled. Mainjada hu. Thanks, uncle. I'm going. Lin. He cried, stopping me by grasping at my sleeve. Hamara Beta Khalid, Kaisa Hain? How is our son, Khalid? Khalid is not with us, I said, struggling to keep my voice and my expression neutral. He went on a journey, a yatra, and I don't know when we'll see him. I took the steps 2 at a time on the way down to the cab, feeling the shock of each jump shudder into my shins. The driver swung out into the traffic at once, and I directed him to a clothing shop that I knew on the Colaba Causeway. One of the sybaritic splendors of Bombay is the limitless variety of relatively inexpensive, well-made clothes constantly changing to reflect the newest Indian and foreign trends. In the refugee camp, Mahmoud Melbaf had given me a long, blue serge vest, a white shirt, and coarse brown trousers. The clothes had served for the trip from Quetta, but in Bombay they were too hot and too strange. They drew curious attention to me when I needed the camouflage of current fashion. I chose a pair of black jeans with strong, deep pockets, a new pair of joggers to replace my ruined boots, and a loose, white silk shirt to wear over the jeans. I changed in the dressing room, sliding my knife in its scabbard under the belt of my jeans and concealing it with the shirt. While waiting at the cashier's desk, I caught sight of myself unexpectedly in an angled mirror that showed my face in 3/4 profile. It was a face so hard and unfamiliar that it startled me to recognize it as my own. I remembered the photograph taken by Shai Kishmishi and looked again into the mirror. There was a cold impassiveness in my face, and a determination, perhaps, which hadn't even begun to gleam in the eyes that had stared so confidently into the lens of Khalid's camera. I snatched up my sunglasses and put them on. Have I changed so much? I hoped that a hot shower, and shaving off my thick beard, would soften some of the hard edges. But the real hardness was inside me, and I wasn't sure if it was simply tough and tenacious or if it was something much more cruel. The cab driver followed my instructions and pulled up near the entrance to Leopold's. I paid him, and stood on the busy causeway for a minute, staring at the wide doorway of the restaurant where my fated connection to Carla and Kaderbai had really begun. Every door is a portal leading through time as well as space. The same doorway that leads us into and out of a room also leads us into the past of the room and its ceaselessly unfolding future. People knew that once, deep within the mind, the imagination. You can still find those who decorate doorways and reverently salute them, in every culture, from Ireland to Japan. I stepped up 1, 2 steps, and reached out with my right hand to touch the doorjamb and then touch my chest, over the heart, in a salaam to fate and homage to the dead friends and enemies who entered with me. Didier Levy was sitting in his usual chair, commanding a view of the patrons and of the busy street beyond. He was talking to Kavita Singh. Her eyes were averted, but he looked up and saw me as I approached the table. Our eyes met and held for a second, each of us reading the other's shifting expressions like diviners finding meanings in the magic of scattered bones. Lin. He shouted, hurling himself forward, flinging his arms around me, and kissing me on both cheeks. It's good to see you, Didier. Bah! He spat, wiping his lips with the back of his hand. If this beard is the fashion for holy warriors, I thank whatever powers protect me that I am an atheist and a coward. There was a little more gray, I thought, in the mop of dark curls that brushed the collar of his jacket. The pale blue eyes were a little more tired, a little more bloodshot. Yet the wicked, leering mischief still arched his eyebrow, and the playful sneer I knew so well and loved was still there, curling his upper lip. He was the same man, in the same city, and it was good to be home. "Hello, Lynn," Kavita greeted me, pushing Didier aside to give me a hug. She was beautiful. Her thick, dark brown hair was tousled and awry. Her back was straight, her eyes were clear, and, as she held me, the casual, friendly touch of her fingers on my neck seemed like such a tender ravishment, after the blood and snow of Afghanistan, that I can still feel it, through all the years since. Sit down, Didier shouted, waving to the waiters for more drinks. "Merde, I heard that you were dead, but I didn't believe it. It is so good to see you. We shall be famously drunk tonight, non?" "No," I replied, resisting the pressure he placed on my shoulder. The disappointment in his eyes moderated my tone, if not my mood. "It's a little early in the day, and I have to get going. I've got something to do." "Very well," he yielded with a sigh. "But you must have one drink with me. It would be too uncivilized for you to leave my company without allowing me at least this little corruption of your holy warring self. After all, what is the point of a man returning from the dead, if it is not to drink strong spirits with his friends?" "Okay," I relented, smiling at him but still standing. "One drink. I'll have a whiskey. Make it a double. Is that corrupt enough for you?" "Ah, Lynn," he grinned, "is there anyone, in this sickly sweet world of ours, who is corrupt enough for me? Where there's a weak will, there's a way, Didier. We live in hope." "But of course," he said, and we both laughed. "I'll leave you to it," Kavita announced, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "I've got to get back to the office. Let's get together, Lynn. You look pretty wild. You look like a story, yar, if ever I saw one." "Sure," I smiled. "There's a story or two. Off the record, of course. Probably keep us going over dinner." "I look forward to it," she said, holding my eye long enough to make sure I felt it in several places at once. She broke the contact to flash a smile at Didier. "Be nasty to someone for me, Didier. I don't want to hear that you've got all sentimental, yar, just because Lynn is back." She walked out with my eyes on her, and when the drinks arrived Didier insisted that I sit down with him at last. "My dear friend, you can stand to eat a meal, if you must, and you can stand to make love, if you are able, but it is impossible to stand and drink whiskey. It is the act of a barbarian. A man who stands up to drink a noble alcohol like whiskey, in all but a toast to some noble thing or purpose, is a beast. A man who will stop at nothing." So we sat, and he raised his glass immediately to toast with mine. "To the living," he offered. "And the dead?" I asked, my glass still on the table. "And the dead," he replied, his smile wide and warm. I raised my glass in turn, clinked it against his, and threw back the double. "Now," he said firmly, the smile discarded as swiftly as it had risen to his eyes. "What is the trouble? Where do you want me to start?" I scoffed. "No, my friend, I am not talking just about the war. There is something else, something very determined in your face, and I want to know the heart of it." I stared back at him in silence, secretly delighted to be back in the company of someone who knew me well enough to read between the frown lines. "Come on, Lynn. There is too much trouble in your eyes. What is the problem? If you want, if it is easier, you can begin by telling me what happened in Afghanistan." "Cater's dead," I said flatly, staring at the empty glass in my hand. "No," he gasped, fearful and resentful, somehow, in the same quick response. "Yes. No. I would hear something. The whole city would know it. I saw his body. I helped to drag it up the mountain to our camp. I helped them bury him. He's dead. They're all dead. We're the only ones left from here, Nazir, Mahmoud, and me." "Abdul Kader. It can't be." Didier was ashen-faced, and the gray seemed to move even into his eyes. Stricken by the news, He looked as though someone had struck him hard on the face. He slumped in his chair and his jaw fell open. He began to slip sideways in the chair, and I was afraid that he would fall to the floor or even suffer a stroke. "Take it easy," I said softly. "Don't go to fucking pieces on me, Didier. You look like shit, man. Snap out of it." His weary eyes drifted up to meet mine. "There are some things, Lynn, that simply cannot be. I am 12, 13 years in Bombay, and always there is Abdul Qadir Khan." He dropped his gaze again, and lapsed into a reverie so rich in thought and feeling that his head twitched and his lower lip trembled in the turbulence of it. I was worried. I'd seen men go under before. In prison, I'd watched men succumb, fragmented by fear and shame, and then slaughtered by solitude. But that was a process. It took weeks, months, or years. Didier's collapse was the work of seconds, and I was watching him crumple and fade from one heartbeat to the next. I moved around the table and sat beside him, pulling him close to me with an arm around his shoulder. "Didier," I hissed in a harsh whisper. "I've got to go. Do you hear me? I came in to find out about my stuff. The stuff I left with you while I was at Nazir's, getting off the dope. Remember? I left my bike, my Enfield, with you. I left my passports and my money and some other stuff. Do you remember? It's very important. I need that stuff, Didier. Do you remember?" "Yes, but of course," he replied, coming to himself with a grumpy little shake of his jaw. "Your things are all safe. Have no fear of that. I have all your things. Do you still have the apartment in Merriweather Road?" "Yes. Is that where my things are? Do you have my things there?" "What? For God's sake, Didier. Snap out of it. Come on. We're going to get up together and walk to your apartment. I need to shave and shower and get organized. I've got something important to do. I need you, man. Don't fuck up on me now." He blinked and turned his head to look at me, his upper lip curling in the familiar sneer. "What is the meaning of such a remark?" he demanded indignantly. "Didier Levy does not fuck up on anyone. Unless, of course, it is very, very early in the morning. You know, Lynn, how I hate morning people, almost as much as I hate the police. Allure, let's go." At Didier's apartment I shaved, showered, and changed into the new clothes. Didier insisted that I eat something. He cooked an omelet while I went through the 2 boxes of my belongings to find my stash of money. About 9,000 American dollars. The keys to my bike, and my best false passport. It was a Canadian book, with my photo and details inserted in it. The false tourist visa had expired. I had to renew it quickly. If anything went wrong in what I planned to do, I would need plenty of money and a good, clean book. "Where are you going now?" Didier asked as I pushed the last forkful of food into my mouth, and stood to rinse the dishes in the sink. "First, I have to fix up my passport," I answered him, still chewing. "Then I'm going to see Madame Jo." "You what?" "I'm going to deal with Madame Jo. I'm going to clear the slate." Khaled gave. I broke off, the words failing, and the thought of Khaled Ansari momentarily bleaching my mind with the mention of his name. It was a white blizzard of emotion storming from the last memory, the last image of him, walking away into the night and the snow. I pushed past it with an effort of will. "Khaled gave me your note in Pakistan. Thanks for letting me know, by the way. I still don't really get it. I still don't know how she got so mad that she had to put me in jail. There was never anything personal in it, from my side. But it's personal now. 4 months in Arthur Road made it personal. That's why I need the bike. I don't want to use cabs. And that's why I've got to get my passport tidied up. If the cops get in on it, I'll need a clean book to hand over." "But you don't know? Madame Jo was attacked last week, no, 10 days ago. The mob, a mob of Sena people, they attacked her palace and destroyed it. There was a great fire. They ran inside the building and they destroyed everything, then they put the place on fire. The building still stands. The staircases and the upstairs rooms still exist. But the place is ruined, and it will never again open. They will pull it down at some time soon. The building is finished, Lynn, and so is she, la madame." "Is she dead?" I asked through clenched teeth. "No, she is alive. And she is still there, so they say. But her power is destroyed. She has nothing. She is nothing. She is a beggar. Her servants are searching the streets for scraps of food to bring to her while she waits for the building to come down. She is finished, Lin. Not quite. Not yet. I moved to the door of his apartment, and he ran to join me. It was the fastest I'd ever seen him move, and I smiled at the strangeness of it. Please, Lin, will you not reconsider this action? We can sit here, together, and drink a bottle or two, non. You will calm down. I'm calm enough now, I replied, smiling at his concern for me. I don't know what I'm going to do. But I have to close the door on this, Didier. I can't just let it go. I wish I could. But there's too much that's, I don't know, tied up in it, I guess. I couldn't explain it to him. It was more than just revenge, I knew that, but the web of connections between Joe, Cotterby, Carla, and me was so sticky with shame and secrets and betrayals that I couldn't bring myself to face it clearly or talk about it to my friend. Bien, he sighed, reading the determination in my face. If you must go to her, then I will come with you. No way, I began, but he cut me off with a furious gesture of his hand. Lin, I am the one who told you of this horrible thing she did to you. Now I must go with you, or I will be responsible for all that happens. And you know, my friend, that I hate responsibility almost as much as I hate the police. Chapter 38. Didier Levy was the worst pillion passenger I've ever known. He held on to me so tightly, and with such rigid tensity, that it was difficult to steer the bike. He howled as we approached cars, and shrieked when we sped up to pass them. On critical, sweeping turns he wriggled in terror, trying to straighten the bike from its necessary lean into the curve. Every time I stopped the bike at a traffic signal, he put both feet down to the ground to stretch his legs and moan about the cramps in his hips. Every time I accelerated away, he dragged his feet on the road and fidgeted for several seconds until he found the footrests. And when taxis or other cars ventured too close to us, he kicked out at them or waved his fist in frantic outrage. By the time we reached our destination, I calculated that the danger faced during a 30-minute ride in fast traffic with Didier was roughly equivalent to a month under fire in Afghanistan. I pulled up outside the factory run by my Sri Lankan friends Vilu and Krishna. Something was wrong. The signs outside had changed, and the double front doors were wide open. I went up the steps and leaned inside to see that the passport workshop was gone, replaced by an assembly line producing garlands of flowers. There is something wrong? Didier asked as I climbed back on the bike and kicked the starter. Yeah, we have to make another stop. They've moved it. I'll have to see Abdul to find out where the new workshop is. Allure, he whined, squeezing me as tightly as if we were sharing a parachute. The nightmare, it goes on. Minutes later I left him with the bike near the entrance to Abdul Ghani's mansion. The watchman at the street door recognized me, and snapped his hand up in a theatrical salute. I put a 20-rupee note in his other hand as he opened the door, and I stepped into the cool, shadowed foyer to be greeted by two servants. They knew me well, and led me upstairs with wide, friendly smiles and a little mime show of comments on the length of my hair and the weight I'd lost. One of the men knocked on the door of Abdul Ghani's large study, and waited with his ear to the door. Ow, Ghani called from within. Come. The servant entered, closing the door behind him, and returned a few moments later. He wagged his head at me and opened the door wide. I walked inside, and the door closed. Brilliant sunshine blazed at the high, arched windows. Shadows reached in spikes and claws across the polished floor. Abdul was sitting in a wing chair that faced the window, and only his plump hands were visible, steepled together like sausages in a butcher's window. So it's true. What's true? I asked, walking around the chair to look at him. I was shocked to see how the 9 months since I'd seen him, had aged Cater's old friend. The thick hair was gray to white, and his eyebrows were frosted with silver. The fine nose was pinched by deep lines that swept past the curve of his mouth to a sagging jaw. His lips, once the most sumptuously sensual I'd seen in Bombay, were as split and cracked as Nazir's had been in the snow mountains. The pouches beneath his eyes drooped past the peak of his cheekbones and reminded me, with a shiver, of those that had dragged down the eyes of the madman Habib. And the eyes, the laughing, golden, amber eyes, were dull, and drained of the soaring joys and vain deceits that once had shone in his passionate life. "You are here," he replied in the familiar Oxford accent, without looking at me. "And that is the truth. Where is Kader?" "Abdul, I'm sorry, he's dead," I answered at once. He was killed by the Russians. He was trying to reach his village, on the way back to Chaman, to deliver some horses." Abdul clutched at his chest and sobbed like a child, mewling and moaning incoherently as the tears rolled fat and freely from his large eyes. After a few moments he recovered, and looked up at me. "Who survived with you?" he asked, his mouth agape. "Nazir and Mahmud. And a boy named Ala-ud-Din. Only 4 of us. Not Khalid? Where is Khalid?" He went out into the snow on the last night, and he never came back. The men said they heard shooting, later, from a long way off. I don't know if it was Khalid they were shooting at. I don't know what happened to him. Then it will be Nazir," he muttered. The sobbing spilled over again, and he plunged his face into his fleshy hands. I watched him uncomfortably, not knowing what to do or say. Since the moment that I'd cradled Kader's body in my arms on the snowy slope of the mountain, I'd refused to face the fact of his death. And I was still angry with Kader Khan. So long as I held that anger before me like a shield, loving Kader and grieving for him were deep and distant wonders of my heart. So long as I was angry, I could fight off the tears and miserable longing that made Ghani so wretched. So long as I was angry, I could concentrate on the job at hand, information about Krishna, Vilu, and the passport workshop. I was on the point of asking him about them when he spoke again. "Do you know what it cost us, apart from his unique life, Kader's hero curse? Millions. It cost us millions to fight his war. We've been supporting it, in one way and another, for years. You might think we could afford it. The sum is not so great, after all. But you're wrong. There is no organization that can support such an insane hero curse as Kader's. And I couldn't change his mind. I couldn't save him. The money didn't mean anything to him, don't you see? You can't reason with a man who has no sense of money and its value. It's the one thing all civilized men have in common, don't you agree? If money doesn't mean anything, there is no civilization. There is nothing." He trailed off into indecipherable mumbles. Tears rolled into the little rivers they found on his cheeks, and dropped through the yellow light into his lap. "Abdul Bhai," I said, after a time. "What? When? Is it now?" he asked, terror suddenly bright in his eyes. His lower lip stiffened in a cruel curve of malice I'd never seen or even imagined in him before that moment. "Abdul Bhai, I want to know where you moved the workshop. Where are Krishna and Vilu? I went to the old workshop, but there's no one there. I need some work on my book. I need to know where you moved to." The fear shrank to a pinpoint in his eyes, and they glittered with it. His mouth swelled in something like the old voluptuary smile, and he looked into my eyes with avid, hungering concentration. "Of course you want to know," he grinned, using the palms of his hands to wipe at the tears. "It's right here, Lynn, in this house. We rebuilt the cellar, and fitted it out. There is a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. Iqbal will show you the way. The boys are working there now." "Thanks," I said, hesitating a moment. "I've got a job to do, but I'll be back later tonight, or tomorrow, at the latest." "I'll see you then. Inshallah," he said softly, turning his face to the windows once more. Inshallah. I went down through the house to the kitchen and lifted the heavy trapdoor. A dozen steps led into the floodlit cellar. Krishna and Vilu greeted me happily, and went to work on my passport immediately. Few things excited them more than a counterfeiting challenge, and they chattered in a spirited little argument before agreeing on the best approach. While they worked, I examined Ghani's new workshop. It was a large space, much larger than the basement of Abdul Ghani's mansion alone. I walked some 30 to 50 meters past light tables, printing machines, photocopiers, and storage cupboards. I guessed that the basement extended beneath the next large house in the street beside Ghani's. It seemed likely that they'd bought the house next door and connected the two cellars. If that were so, I assumed, there would be another exit, leading into the neighboring house. I was searching for it when Krishna called to tell me that my Rush Jobs visa was ready. Intrigued by the new setup beneath the houses, I promised myself that as soon as possible I would return and inspect the workshop thoroughly. "Sorry to keep you," I muttered to Didier as I climbed back onto the bike. "It took longer than I expected. But the passport's done. We can go straight to Madame Jo's now." "Don't hurry, Lynn," Didier sighed, clutching at me with all his strength as we moved out into the traffic. The best revenge, like the best sex, is performed slowly and with the eyes open. "Carla?" I shouted over my shoulder as the bike accelerated into the metal stream. "Non, I think it's mine." But I can't be sure," he shouted back, and we both laughed for love of her. I parked the bike in the driveway of an apartment building a block away from the palace. We walked on the other side of the road until we passed the building by half a block, studying it for signs of activity within. The facade of the palace seemed intact and undamaged, although metal and wooden sheets on the windows, and planks nailed across the main door, hinted at the destruction the mob had wrought inside. We turned and walked back, passing the building again and searching for an entrance. If she's in there, and if her servants are bringing her food, they're not coming and going through that door. "Yes, exactly my own thought," he agreed. "There must be another way inside." We found a narrow lane that gave access to the rear of the buildings in the street. In contrast to the proud, clean, main street, the access lane was filthy. We stepped carefully between rank, scum-covered pools of black liquid and skirted piles of oily, unidentifiable debris. I glanced at Didier, knowing from his wretched grimace that he was calculating how many drinks it would take to rid himself of the stench that filled his nostrils. The walls and fences on either side of the lane were made of stone, brick, and cement, patched together over many decades, and swarming with a wormy writhe of plants, mosses, and creepers. Counting back from the corner, building by building, we found the rear of the palace and pressed on a short wooden gate, set into a high stone wall. The gate opened at the touch, and we stepped into a spacious rear courtyard that must have been a luxurious and beautiful retreat before the mob had attacked it. Heavy clay pots had been toppled and shattered, their burdens of earth and flowers spilled in muddy confusion. Garden furniture had been smashed to kindling. Even the paving tiles were cracked in many places, as if they'd been struck with hammers. We found a blackened door that led into the house. It was unlocked, and swung inward with a rusty creak of complaint. "You wait here." My tone allowed no possibility of protest. "Keep watch for me. If someone comes in through that gate, slow them up, or give me a signal." "As you say," he sighed. "Don't be too long. I don't like it here." Bon chance. I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me, and I wished that I'd thought to bring a torch. It was dark, and the floor was treacherously cluttered with broken dishes, pots, pans, and other vessels strewn amid the black lumps of furniture and fallen beams. I picked my way slowly through the ground floor kitchen and on into a long corridor that led toward the front of the big house. I passed several rooms that were burned. In one of them, the fire had been so fierce that the floor was missing, and the charred bearers showed through the gaps like the ribs of some great animal's remains. Near the front of the house I found the stairway that I'd taken, years before, when I'd come there with Carla to save Lisa Carter. The Compton wallpaper, once so rich in color and texture, was scorched and peeling from the blistered walls. The stairway itself was carbonized, its carpet scorched to stringy clumps of ash. I climbed up slowly, testing each step before pressing down with my full weight. One step collapsed beneath me when I was halfway to the top, and I scrambled upward more quickly to the landing on the first floor. On the upper level one had to pause while my eyes adjusted to the darkness. After a few moments I could make out the gaps in the floor, and I began to inch my way around them. The fire had incinerated some parts of the house, leaving holes and blackened stumps, while sparing other parts of the house altogether. Those pristine sections were so clean, and so precisely as I remembered them, that they heightened the eerie strangeness of the place. I felt as if I was moving between the past, before the fire, and the ruined present, as if my own memories were creating those grandiose, unconsumed zones in the house. Some way along that wide passage on the upper level my foot plunged through a papery section of floor, and in my hard reaction I drove backward into the wall behind me. The wall itself collapsed and I found myself falling, in a clumsy stumble, flaying out with my hands to find something solid to cling to amid the crumbling rubble. I landed with a thump, much more quickly than I expected, and realized at once that I was inside one of Madame Jo's secret corridors. The wall I'd fallen through appeared to be as solid as all the others, but it was merely a plywood screen papered over with her ubiquitous Compton pattern. I stood up and brushed myself off in a very narrow, low corridor that snaked ahead, following the shapes and corners of the rooms it circumscribed. Metal grates were set into the walls of the rooms that the secret corridor passed. Some of them were low, near the floor, and others were higher. Beneath the higher metal grates were boxed steps. From the lowest of those steps I looked into a room through the heart-shaped gaps in the metal grille. I could see the whole room beyond. The cracked mirror on the wall, the burned and collapsed bed, and the rusted metal nightstand beside it. There were several steps above the one on which I stood, and I imagined her, Madame Jo, crouched there on the topmost step and breathing silently while she watched and watched. The corridor wound through several turns, and I lost my bearings, unsure in the enshrouding darkness if I faced the front of the house or the rear. At one point the secret corridor inclined